And there's probably going to be a future presentation that's going to drive into this a little bit, but I think that what I'm thinking about is a common thread that will maybe in the long term bring us all back together. I'm hoping Charlie will share some of his thoughts on why this work is personally fulfilling, but I know from my experience as an uncompensated and occasionally pilloried environmental advocate that representing the interest of the natural environment can be a lonely and challenging endeavor. Given our fellowship's commitment to environmental health and stewardship, I hope Charlie can also let us know again how we as individuals can help the Conservancy help us. Charlie? You're very welcome.
I was delighted to get an invitation on behalf of Blue Ridge Conservancy to come and speak to you all today. I'm going to take a little bit of liberty with the presentation and talk a little bit more in a big picture way about the work of land trusts. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. Okay. I move around a lot too, so that could be a little bit of a problem. I want to thank the congregation and the church for this honorarium to Blue Ridge Conservancy. Peyton, thank you so much. It takes a little bit of everybody's help to do the kind of work that we do. First of all, I am from Northwest North Carolina. I grew up in Hickory, and I moved back to the Watauga County area in 1981 after finishing law school at Wake Forest. I don't want to talk too much about specifics about our projects and the status of them. I know that most of you know that what we're doing is some high-profile projects like the Middle Fork Greenway, the Northern Peak State Trail. We've been adding land to the state parks, both Grandfather Mountain State Park, Elk Knob State Park, Wildlife Resources Commission land, the National Forests, land of the Blue Ridge Parkway. I mean, it's a whole bunch of things that we do. At the moment, we have 20 active projects pending at one time. I mean, these are projects that are going to completion from beginning to end, and a slew more of things that we've been building relationships with people about. But that 20 pending at one time is the most we've ever had happening at Blue Ridge Conservancy at one particular point in time. But what I really want to talk about is that higher elevation view of what Blue Ridge Conservancy does and how it fits in with land trust work in general across particularly the Appalachians and our region. We all live in a very special place. Some of us were lucky enough to have been born here or moved here early on, and others have come here because of this unbelievable beauty that we have and share, and also the opportunities that it gives us. So we live in an area that has 100-year plus tradition of land conservation. I like to refer to it as the cradle of land conservation in North Carolina. When you think about it, you think about Bertha Cone and Julian Price, Hugh Morton. Those are some well-known examples of people who were philanthropic and used wealth. And today, we're all beneficiaries of their vision and what they've done. But there are also a lot of smaller, at least lesser known, I'll say, people that have had a tremendous impact on the environment and land conservation efforts where we live. First of all, I'm going to say I'll brag about the staff of Blue Ridge Conservancy because I'll put them up there as some of the lesser known people that are working every day as hard as they can to make a difference in this effort. We have an all-star team of people. We're adding more people so that we can increase the amount of land acquisition and land protection work. The opportunities are there, and the need is even greater, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. One person that is well known to many of you, who's no longer with us, but maybe not as well known to other people, is Ben Edwards. Ben was one of the early people who had a vision and a belief that a Middle Fork Greenway could be built to connect Blowing Rock to Boone or Boone to Blowing Rock. And I personally miss Ben, and I know many of you miss Ben. But there are a lot of unsung heroes like Ben in this community and across this country. There's another person who's no longer with us, but he was a good friend of mine that I met when I was practicing law, and he came to me and he was dying of cancer and he needed to help put his estate in order. And his name was Glenn Norris. And Glenn is a story of someone who lived here. His forefathers lived here. He had a multi-generational farm over in Ashe County at the foot of Peak Mountain, or the peak that went all the way to the top of the peak. And the peak is the highest point in Ashe County. There's a picturesque farmhouse that's there today that was part of the family home. It has been featured on the cover of Our State magazine. I got to know Glenn really well over a course of time, and he had a fascinating story that ties into the love of land and the importance of it to the people of this region. Glenn, at age 17, lied about his age and entered the Navy to fight in World War II. He was sent to the Pacific Theater, and he spent the entire war in the Pacific. He told me these stories over a course of multiple times, visiting with him in his house. We shared a love. Andy, you'll appreciate this. What drew me to him immediately was he was a trout fisherman. And that he and I hit that off on the very first day, and it really opened the door to these conversations we had. But he was stationed on the island. I know I'm probably missing the pronunciation, Tiananmen Island, but that's the island where the bombers were launched to drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He was there, and he helped unload from the USS Indianapolis the parts of what were the bombs that were being assembled that were then going to be flown to Japan. He said that they didn't tell them what it was, but that it was a secret, but that it would end the war. One thing he described, though, was the USS Indianapolis. It had sneaked into the port, and the Japanese didn't see it when it was coming, but they located it after it was there, and they bombed it, and hundreds of sailors died on the USS Indianapolis. Glenn told me that they couldn't do anything on the shore to help those sailors, and most of them were actually eaten by sharks. So that did end the war, as we all know, and they put Glenn on a ship to come back to the West Coast. I think it was San Diego, and then they put him on a train with others to come back to the eastern United States. And so the train went through Abingdon, Virginia, and he said that with the people that were getting off at Abingdon, the train didn't even come to a complete stop. They had to jump off the train. But this is like a Hallmark movie or something. He told me that he walked from Abingdon to the Peak, to the family farm. It was after the war ended. They didn't know he was coming, and he walked up that dirt road, and there was his family, and they greeted him. He loved that farm, and he loved that mountain. And he told me when we were practicing law, he didn't want that mountain to be developed and sold and had log homes and such. Unfortunately, he passed away before we were able to protect that land. But his wife, Martha, became a good friend of mine as well. And Martha and I stayed in touch. And I continued to talk. And I don't know if any of you know Curtis Smalling, who's real active with Audubon. Well, Curtis and I had been talking about it for a while because the gold-winged warbler was there. And it was a really critical species. And so we met at a different conference somewhere, and I said, Curtis, they're going to end up having to sell that land because they need the money. And so we started again on the effort. And over a course of weeks working with state parks, we finally got the word that parks wanted it and would buy it. And so I called Martha up and I said, Martha, you know how Glenn wanted to protect this piece of property, this farm? And she said, yeah, I do. But I'm not lying, this is the truth. I've got an appointment tomorrow at 1:30 with a realtor and we're getting ready to list it. And so I said, Martha, can I come over? And so I left the law office. I went down there and I told her the pros and cons. And we talked about Glenn's love for the mountain and what he said to me when he was dying. And they did not list it. And ultimately State Parks bought it. And now it's part of Elk Knob State Park. But it was that love of the land, somebody who's in this region that knew what it meant. And there are people like that and stories like that all over this area and probably really all over the country. That's kind of a long introduction about why preserving land is important. But you can see that these people invested their time and their resources to protect land and make a difference in this effort. And why did they do it? I submit there was one word really that sums it up for why they spent that time, and it's love. It was love for the incredible scenic beauty we have. It was love for the ecological diversity of plants and animals and geology. It was love for the recreational opportunities that it provided. So we can see land conservation has a rich history, but it has an even more promising future. And its need for land conservation has never been greater. I don't know if this is something I've done or those. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm moving around a lot. But why do I say that the need has never been greater? Maureen talked about it a minute ago, about fear of what's happening. So we see it in a micro way, but I want to talk about it in a macro way for a second. This place that we live, that I talked about, is so beautiful. It is also an incredibly important region in the world. And I'm talking about the Appalachian Mountains from Georgia to Maine. It is recognized as one of the 4 most critical areas in the world for climate resilience. And a lot of people know it's special, but there's so many things about it and why it's so special. It's really a super corridor, a super highway for biological diversity from Georgia to the north toward Canada. In the Appalachians, there are 64 high priority bird species in this migration corridor. There are 80,000 occurrences of rare species. There are large animals like bear, moose, elk, and bobcat that move through this corridor. The resilience really goes back to the formation of the Appalachian all the way to the Ice Age. And that's partly why it's so unique ecologically and geologically. One interesting point to me, we're talking about climate resilience, is 56% of the eastern United States above ground carbon is stored in the southern Appalachians, but only 26% of the landscape in the Appalachians is protected. So that gets to that urgency. What are the other 3? You'd probably ask, well, what are the other 3 of the 4? So one is the Amazon, another is the jungles and areas of Indonesia, and another is an area in Kenya. Those are the 4 that have been recognized by scientists. And all of those are under attack as well. In the Amazon, you probably remember the President Bolsonaro, who was clear cutting and burning and slashing the Amazon rainforest. Just a couple weeks ago, I heard in Indonesia, the threat is copper mining. They are leveling and digging. It's a huge impact on that unique area itself. I don't really know as much about the Kenyan problem, but I'm sure there are threats there too. So what do land trusts and Blue Ridge Conservancy as part of this? What are our strategies to help protect like the Appalachians? We're one group, one organization that covers it from roughly Mount Mitchell to the Virginia line. But there's a land trust to the south. There's a land trust to the south of that, one to the south. There's one to the north, all the way up to Maine. So one strategy that we work with and that helps us guide what kind of projects we do is achieving connectivity with pieces of property. We are not interested really in isolated little islands. Occasionally we do if it's to protect an important species where it has some unique ecological value. But all these land trusts working together to protect these corridors and this connectivity is really key. The second thing is to protect large areas of forest for climate resilience. That's the second part of that strategy. And the third strategy is really building resilient communities in the areas that we work. And resilient communities includes connectivity within the communities, like the Middle Fork Greenway, the Northern Peak State Trail. All the nonprofits in Boone and other areas, I submit, have the same ultimate goal. And again, if you look at from a higher elevation, it's really to improve our communities, have healthy communities. When you look at the Hunger and Health Coalition, the Children's Council, Kathy Parham's Children's Playhouse, WIN, Western Youth Network, all of these, we're doing certain things, specific things, but the goal is really to create a healthier community. And that's what Blue Ridge Conservancy is doing. We're doing it, our part, in the way that we know best how to do it. And I'd submit that we're making great progress in the areas where we're working, like the Middle Fork Greenway and Northern Peak State Trail, but also all the work adding land to North Carolina state parks. We're doing things constantly in terms of additions to all of those public lands. I should have mentioned, and Andy, you probably would remind me at the end of this, is also river access. River access is really important. We've worked a lot with the Watauga River Keeper and other partners so that people have access to the streams and rivers. Something that I've been really proud of, and I don't think I'd mentioned this to you, we ran a calculation, Andy, about the Middle Fork Greenway and what we've done there to protect the Middle Fork of the New River. The Wildlife Commission came out with a study recently that the economic impact of trout fishing in Western North Carolina is $1.38 billion. And of the top 5 counties, 3 of the counties in Western North Carolina are in Blue Ridge Conservancy's service area, and that's Watauga, Ashe, and Avery. And the most popular river for fishing in Watauga is the Middle Fork of the New, according to the Wildlife Commission. The Middle Fork Greenway has permanently protected for public access at this point, literally right at 3 miles of that stream. And we're adding to it. So there's going to be more. So that's part, again, of what we're doing to build these healthy communities. I want to shift just for a moment to begin to wrap up and talk about things in a way that really is troubling because it's not any news to anyone here about how trying the times are that we live in right now. I mean, it is really every day I wake up and I worry. I worry about my grandson and my children, and I worry about us. Absolutely, I do. The Pew Research Center did a study, and this also is really not that surprising. 90% of Americans experience some level of exhaustion over politics and the way we are being governed. So that's about as close to unanimity as you can get. But I submit that there really is hope with what we can do and how we can do it. Maureen, again, it sounds like you expressed those frustrations about what can be done and what the future is. But for land conservation and Blue Ridge Conservancy, there are 3 simple steps that we've been trying to follow. But I think these steps transfer to any of you or any of the organizations you're with. And I'm talking about impacting our leaders to have the results that help our communities become healthier, and taking care of the planet. And the first is engagement. We all need to stay engaged. We all need to be informed. We need to not be afraid of having personal engagement with the leaders of our community. And that includes the county commission, the town council. It's one thing to sit at a computer and send an email, but it really is more impactful if you attend a meeting and there's a public comment period and you speak up. It doesn't really matter how you speak. It's just that you try to highlight what's important. So engagement is one of those things. And with Blue Ridge Conservancy, that is one of the key strategies that we try to follow. With that, but a second one is focus on advocacy. And nobody really does advocacy better than Mountain True and the Riverkeeper. But we advocate, Blue Ridge Conservancy does, for the land and parks and river access and trails. And if you think about it, those are really nonpartisan type things. So think about advocating for things that share a common purpose, things that are important to everyone, because those things, you begin to develop a dialogue with those leaders. You find common ground. You're not being divisive, and your influence increases. So the third is to stay positive. Tell stories to the people you're interacting with of the successes of your organization if you're involved in one, or if you observe something good happening in the community. Keep it positive, because that also helps minimize divisiveness. So I'll leave you with, remember to engage, to advocate, and to accentuate the positive. So finally, Peyton had asked me if I wanted to have a few readings, which I probably should have done, but there are 2 quotes that I've carried with me and who I do read periodically and share with people periodically. And just like before, one is from a well-known individual and one is from someone who's not very well-known, but they really all have made a difference. The first, though, is Ansel Adams. He said, "We who are gathered here may represent a particular elite, not of money and power, but of concern for the earth and earth's sake." That's important, I think, in talking about the people that gather and trying to make a difference. The final quote was sent to me back in 2019 from a woman named Cynthia Payne, who lived in and lives in Raleigh. And Cynthia and I have become friends, but I didn't really know her well at that time. But she was a supporter and is a supporter of Blue Ridge Conservancy. And she wrote to me and said, "I think the most meaningful work is that which will ripple down the generations after we are gone. You are doing that," talking about Blue Ridge Conservancy. So those are the things that drive me, looking at the earth, how we can make a difference, the strategies of how we can do it, and why it's important. So I want to thank each of you for allowing me to talk, but I'm also happy to answer questions, maybe in a more granular way about the one always here. When's that Middle Fork Greenway going to get built? I am happy to answer any questions.
I don't have any questions. I just want to say to our speaker, I am a member of the Blue Ridge Conservancy and the Nature Conservancy, and obviously I believe in the goals and the everything about it. And I have a bumper sticker on my car that that tells everybody the same thing. And being a member of this organization makes me very proud to know of what I'm doing as a small way, as an individual. And we live in such a place that two of the people of your organization come to inspect a piece of property that was put into the Conservancy, and they always park in our yard. And this woman, well, and it's with our permission. And this woman came by herself one time, and I said, okay, how long do you think you're going to be down there? And she said, whatever. And I said, okay, we are planning to leave here at a certain time. And if you're not back, I have a card and I'm going to call people. And then I found out they have field phones. And so they're really not alone, which made me very relaxed about the whole thing. And thank you for coming to speak to us and to make it understood how important it is to conserve our land.
Anybody else have any thoughts or questions? Catherine?
Yeah, I'll just comment first because I'm obsessed with the Middle Fork Greenway, and so the website is great though. If you can always find updates there. I'm always going to see like where, what's already built, and I think I've traveled all the already built parts of it. But I was just I'm sure that you know about the new sort of quality enhancement plan at Appalachian State. The QEP is all about climate resilience, and I was just curious if anyone from the university has reached out to you, or if there are any plans for some synergy there between the university and the Blue Ridge Conservancy.
Synergy with the university? Oh, okay, well, maybe good news.
Well, there's nothing specifically, but I think there's certainly opportunity there. Individually, we do interact with a lot of the professors and higher administrators at the university. We love to partner with them when we can. They actually own a farm called the Blackburn Vanoy Farm, which is on the edge of Watauga and Ash, and is protected by a conservation easement that the families put on the property before it went to ASU. So we interact with ASU all the time in regard to what they can do and how they should do it on those farms. We also were gifted, as some of you may know, 46 acres of land midway between Boone and Blowing Rock on Aho Road by Audrey Bentley, who passed away in 2019. And that 46 acres of land, we are developing it into a conservation campus with an eye toward education. And so we have been interacting with professors and leaders at the university who are bringing people out to study things on our campus. We have now recently finished redoing a 3-car garage into an education meeting event space. So there's a facility for educational purposes there. If you've seen any of that, I want you to know that all of that was paid for by a particular husband and wife donor. So monies that have been raised for projects, none of that has gone into any of the improvements on that campus. It was a donor, and that donor said to me, he said, I'm this is something I'm good at, and I can envision how things can be improved and facilities. And I want to do this for y'all so that you don't have to worry about infrastructure and paying for it, because I want you to focus on your mission. And that's what that donor did. And for instance, like Middle Fort Greenway, again, I'm really proud of this. Every dollar that's being contributed to the Greenway is going to the Greenway. Wendy Patapersti, our Middle Fort Greenway project director, who some of you know is one of the most outstanding leaders in this community, her salary is paid for completely by an individual donor, and they've been paying her salary in total since really the 2016. So when we're raising money, it's not going to overhead. In fact, we have a 93.8% rate that goes into programs with what we do. It's one of the highest in the country. We have a 99.9% charity navigator rating. It's one of the highest ratings. Matter of fact, I believe it's the highest nonprofit rating of any nonprofit in Watauga County. And that's because of transparency and governance and responsibility of how we spend our money. For every dollar that we've raised through our audits, we've proven that the last audit, $12 has come from that dollar in for projects, whether it's Middle Fort Greenway, buying land for whatever. So I'm really proud of that, and it's something that we're going to continue to do.
I was going to mention that the 4-star rating and all that, and I think that's something that when you're asking people either to donate their hard-earned money for, that's certainly something you come comes into your head. I know Glenn had a question. I'll bring it back here, and then we'll go on Zoom momentarily.
Oh, thank you. How much of the Middle Fork is completed, like percentages? And also in terms of percentages, but also in terms of miles.
Okay. And you're pretty surprised at how close we are to achieving 2/3 of it. The route is about 6.5 miles. We have about 2.2 miles completed, but they're not connected. And there's the connector underneath the 321 at Tweetsy. And we have the money. The contract's been signed. They actually began work to make that connection before the trout moratorium kicked in October. The trout moratorium ends April the 15th. So our contractor's ready to begin to finish that. We'll have a ribbon cutting connecting those two sometime this summer. So then that's going to be a little bit more than 2 miles connected. So you could go back and forth for 4. But we also will probably be going to construction on the section of the Greenway from where it connects or close to 321 to Payne Branch Park, which was Ben Edwards' love and joy. That's another piece there that we are in the design, engineering, and have the money in hand to do. We also are going to bid in perhaps 1st of May to go from the Tanger Outlet section to the Blue Ridge Parkway and the Blue Ridge Parkway to the Foley Center. We're still working with the Parkway on that connection. Working with the federal government with the permitting is a lot more difficult, but we actually will be going to bid and construction this year on that. So by sometime next year, we'll be under construction on about 4.5 miles of the 6.5. And so the speed of which this has been coming is relative to what people are seeing on the ground. People see it, but it's a reality. It's finally going to happen. And so donations have increased. Our support from legislators has increased. The Watauga TDA. So roughly that's kind of where we are with it. It's happening a lot faster than I would have believed 3 years ago.
Sounds like you've got some momentum.
Yes, that's
a
good word.
Can we go to Zoom real quick for Manny's got his hand raised?
The group sounds wonderful. I have a pet peeve with organizations, and not you. I send them a small contribution, and I know a good source of donors is your donors. So it seems like every month I get another solicitation. It's always very, very urgent. And it's kind of annoying. So I send some groups, I say, please only send me a request once a year and I'll honor it. But some groups keep on sending, keep on. So I just hope you don't do that. I will send in a contribution. But please, 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 whoever does the mailings, have some way with computers. Don't bug these people. Thank you.
Well, Manny, I'll assure you that didn't come, those don't come from Blue Ridge Conservancy. We send out a year-end mailing in November, and that's the one direct solicitation we send out. Obviously, people, and so that that's not our style. If people do choose to donate through the year, we have a auction, gathering, a celebration in June, but we do not send out multiple solicitations trying to raise the flag saying that we need your money today in order to do X. So that's not our style, Manny.
Listen,
But let me hopefully ask the last question here. My biggest hope, and two pieces of your advice is tie in with some of my feelings, which is about incremental change. We really have to change minds one at a time. Obviously, the younger minds are most critical to me because they're still thinking freely, hopefully, and not polluted on some level or not. So to my mind, there is, and you obviously have as part of your plans, the educational component. So can you speak any more about that, how that's going to roll out? And maybe with the idea of, we have resources, they're not unlimited, how we could help. Either, we're all educators, we've all had families, we raised our kids, we try and raise the village like we were instructed to do, but where you're headed with that and how we can help.
First of all, we finished the education center building and got the certificate of occupancy in November. So we have a task force comprised of staff and board members looking at how we're going to use it. So I would characterize our use of it now and through the next months of this summer as kind of a soft opening, so to speak, because we're really trying to feel out what we have and how best to use it. And so part of the Blue Ridge Conservancy mission really isn't education. We don't have one of those strategic goals, but what we have are the assets to work with groups who know how to do education well. And that could well be the Unitarian Fellowship here. But groups like Audubon, Muddy Sneakers in the public schools, different groups like that, the Plant Society, people that do have educational components, that's who we're wanting to draw in first because they know how to educate. And so we will set it up and have the facility, the grounds for them to work. And as we see what we have and how it flows and how it works, then I think after this year, we'll know better going forward. We are doing staff restructuring. I've hired a new person who is going to work as an assistant development director. She also is a bookkeeper. And so that is going to free up one staff person whose job is primarily going to be the liaison to the public, to y'all and others about using the property for educational or other ways. I'll mention the reason we're hiring an assistant development director goes back to what my talk was about. There's a real need and there's an opportunity to increase the amount of land protection work. But Eric Eagle, our land protection director, and Ben Lucas, our stewardship director, are at capacity. They can't do more than they're doing right now. 20 pending projects at one time is unreal. And so the strategy is that Scott Elliott, who most of you know is our director of development, will be freed up to work more individually with individuals and foundations to raise money. And it's not just to raise that money, it's to hire another land protection specialist that can increase our capacity of this work. So that gets to the educational part of it. And I'll share one thing because I'm proud of this, even if it doesn't come to pass. In the couple weeks ago, Eric and I received an email from a foundation that we had never heard of. And and in fact, we both thought it was probably just a junk solicitation email. And we about just deleted it, to be honest with you. But it caught my eye and it caught his eye independently of each other. And it was an invitation to apply to be a VIS fellowship host organization. And VIS is Swiss and it's WISS. And it was a foundation started by a gentleman named Weiss, who came to the United States, went to Harvard MBA school, started a business that manufactured medical types of devices and equipment. And he ultimately sold it, evidently had made billions of dollars. He was a recreationalist, a land protection guy. He lives in Wilson, Wyoming. And we were one of 12 organizations in the United States, big ones too, but one of 12 invited to apply for a VIS fellow to work in Blue Ridge Conservancy in land protection, acquisition, and stewardship. And so of the 12, they're going to fund 5 to 7 fellows. So the odds are pretty good for us. And when you put it in concept with the importance of the Appalachians and climate resiliency, I think we may have a really decent chance. So you can't just apply. You have to be invited to apply. So we were one of 12 organizations, big ones and small ones. And so that would expedite our ability to increase our land protection work more quickly than the other route. But if it doesn't work, we still have our strategy in place of how we're going to increase capacity to protect more land that's important to all of us.
For that. Well, in the end, I would argue that I love getting my monthly or quarterly, I think, monthly email. So you can sign up for an email on the site, on the website. It's the best way to keep track. Then I've been to the fundraising event in June. Fabulous. You don't have to have big money bags hanging out of your pocket. It helps, but it doesn't, not a requirement. Thank you, Charlie. And I'm glad you were able to share your expertise with us. We're going to wrap up more or less on time with a closing bit of music. Thank you again, Catherine. It's number 118 in the Gray Hymnal. This is another one I've never heard before, but we're going to try and give it a go. Yeah, yeah, in my sleep. Little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. There we go. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Build up the world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, I've never heard that version before. Thank you, Catherine. All right, I'd like to close with a couple words, and then we'll have our childless extinguishing. This is a Native American quote, if you will. I think it's particularly obviously appropriate given the work that Charlie's organization and the things we aspire to be a part of in nature. Beauty is before me and beauty behind me, above me and below me hovers the beautiful. I am surrounded by it. I am immersed in it. In my youth, I'm aware of it, and in old age, I shall walk quietly the beautiful trail. In beauty, it has begun, and in beauty, it is ended. And obviously, we don't like to leave the energy that we have here, but we must. And as we extinguish our chalice, we are reminded that we want to keep that light with us. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we will carry in our hearts until we are together again. And that's it. Go in peace.
Thank you.